All right, my name is Jennings, and I'm a JavaScript software developer. Let's see, I don't want to try slide captions. Automatically displayed, got it, okay. All right, so that's me. I work here in Austin. This is a picture from some stuff on my wall. This is like my workstation for music, some shirts, a keyboard. I work at a spider house a lot. That's my Jeep. And I work for PubNub. I work remotely from Austin, Texas. And my title there is Innovation Engineer. So I do a little bit of different work. Instead of working on huge products, I make new products. And I work in the office of the CTO. So the CTO invented PubNub, and then as the company grew, he sort of had a lot of pet projects he wanted to start, but he was not able to obviously code them because he's got all the CTO responsibility. So I do them for him. Like that I'm going to talk about today. It's called ChatEngine, and ChatEngine is what it sounds like. It helps you build chat applications. But first, we'll talk about PubNub, because ChatEngine is effectively built on top of PubNub, and therefore we have to understand that first. So this is the PubNub logo, and what PubNub does is it's a real-time as a service. So what that means is when you're doing chat, you need some kind of server infrastructure, and PubNub will be that infrastructure for you. This is a graph of, an animation of publish subscribe. So if you're familiar with PubSub, that's kind of where PubNub comes from. And this is a really popular pattern for sending notifications. For example, if you are going to hail an Uber, you would send a request for an Uber ride, and then all the drivers would receive that request, and that would look just like this. But in between that, it's not peer-to-peer, right? There's a network in between. So you publish the message to PubNub, and then PubNub publishes it out to all the drivers. It also works many-to-many. So this is a many-to-many example. Many publishers, many subscribers. And PubNub is a global network. So they guarantee 1/4 second latency and 99% uptime. We have 200,000 developers, and we just ran this like huge event. It was the World Series of, it was the India Premier League cricket like championship, and it was hosted by Hotstar, which is one of our clients. And so how did I get here in this position, making this framework? I started out by making this little app called Mote.io, and it was just a little phone app that you would use to control a web browser. So it was like a Chrome extension and a little app. And this is Steven. So I was just like a solo guy. I was also in New York, and I was trying to get press for my little app, and Steven reached out and said that he was looking for people to write on the blog. So I said, oh, hey, that's a great way to get press, and I tweeted at him. That started a conversation, and he said, hey, why don't you come over here, work for us, and just start building these little apps for us, because that will demonstrate to developers like what's going on. I know this is not about Slack yet, but I just thought it'd be interesting to give you sort of the background of how this whole thing came to be. So I joined as a developer evangelist, and that's, like I'm saying, somebody who makes little apps. A developer evangelist is a spokesperson, a mediator, and a translator between a company and both its technical staff and outside developers. So what that means is you are a programmer that is in charge of reaching out to other programmers and sort of getting them interested in the technology, showing them how to do stuff, holding their hand, things like that. This term is outdated. The new modern term is really developer relations, DevRel. People don't like the name evangelist because of the religious association, so DevRel is really what it is now. But it's more commonly known as evangelist. This kind of DevRel thing is like just happening right now. So I just made a bunch of small projects. I made a little multiplayer Minecraft kind of thing for the web. I made a little house that you can use your phone to like turn on the lights and open the doors. And then I made this charting example. And so this would take real-time information from your phone or your IoT device, and it would chart it out. And this is an animation of that. I believe this is actually Node.js memory usage. So it's a little, it's a script within a Node process that's measuring the memory and then publishing it over PubNub and displaying it on a UI. Yeah, so I think I hover over it there for a second. You can see it says RSS. But so that was like really interesting, and that turned into something bigger. So we went forward with that and built this whole mapping and charting library. And we called it, Stephen called it Eon based on my name, which is Ian. So everyone at the office started referring to me as Eon instead of Ian for like 2 years, maybe. But this was sort of the trend, and that's when we get into chat. So it was sort of this, you just embed these scripts on a page. It can let you draw graphs over the internet. On the left side is the client code that would display the chart, and on the right side is the PubNub publishing code. And as you update the values, the chart updates live. We did the same thing for mapping. So you would publish a latitude and longitude, and it would move a marker. And that's where we get into chat. So first, just so we're all on the same page, what is chat? Chat is the idea that you have two people who are communicating over different devices, right? You actually might have 3 devices, like maybe you use Slack on your phone and your computer, but you're talking to a channel, you're just chatting with other people. So back in 2011, before I even joined the company, one of the most popular blog posts they ever did was called Chat in 10 Lines. This was on the top of Hacker News for like a day, and this is still one of the most popular things that they did. So then later in 2014, after I joined, I thought it'd be funny to do chat in 1 line of JavaScript. And I made this little jQuery thing where you just basically drop in 1 line jQuery plugin, and it makes a PubNub chat. And then something funny happened. I got called into a meeting, and the CEO and the CTO came to me, and they're saying like, hey, a lot of people are building chat. Like this is like 1/4 of the people who are coming to use PubNub, they're all building chat. And if you look at these trends here, this is messaging apps for social networking. And messaging in late 2015 surpassed social networks in adoption. So chat has just been growing massively. So they said, you know, we want that Project Eon for chat. We want you to make another library, a drop-in library that's for chat applications. So that was Eon. And yeah, so they wanted a framework that would help you make WhatsApp, Slack, Facebook Messenger, Flowdoc, all those things, many different patterns, many different devices, right? Sort of just a universal chat framework. So for the sake of, you know, giving myself an idea of what to build, we just said, let's try to make Slack. Like, what would it be like to make Slack, and what would that require, right? Can one person do that? And what would that, yeah, what would that be? And if you look at the requirements, you know, there's typing indicators, image uploads, notifications. There's a UI part. It's 3 apps, right? It's mobile. It's on the web. It's on Electron. There's public chats, private chats, security, authentic. I mean, this is just massive. So how can a small startup ever possibly make this? And how can we enable startups to make their own Slack? One really important thing too to notice is the bots, right? So Trello is there. Trello's got rich embeds, and this is not a user, right? That's like an artificial user. So it's got an API that has to act in the same way as the user does. So like I said, it's cross-platform. It's just a huge task. I mean, this is crazy. So I started out by building something small, and I built this thing called real-time JS, but it doesn't have any of the vowels. So it's just RLTM.js. And taking the PubNub concepts, PubNub has really low-level concepts, so they have like publish and subscribe and like channels, and everything is very like, there's a lot of C programmers on the team. I'll just put it like that. Everything is like as small utility as possible. And I combined a few of the things together, and I called them, you know, users and rooms, and you know, things that were complicated became a little simpler. I wonder if you guys can see this, but it sort of starts paving the way for what will come later, really just simplifying these things into more abstract concepts. I also made a thing that would let you use PubNub or Socket.io, thinking that if someone were to start building with Socket.io, they'd be able to move into PubNub. But eventually this project basically just wasn't really going in the right direction. It wasn't what the company wanted. So we go back to the requirements here. I just read a cool post on product that said, start with the end goal. Start with, as if you were going to write a press release of the product you're going to build, and then work your way back from that. So using Slack as an example was really helpful to me to figure out what we would need. So again, all that UI stuff, what do we do about that? What does this have to do with Node.js? A really interesting thing happened when I started this. PubNub originally had a JavaScript SDK and they had a Node SDK, and they were each individual. But as I started working, they actually merged them into one SDK, right? That way they could maintain only one repository, and there's, you know, they didn't need to work on the, we all know the story here at the Node meetup, right? It doesn't, they can be the same thing now. This is about the same time that Gulp and Webpack and I forget what the other compilers were, but everything was kind of going crazy in front-end land for like a couple of years of the compilers and all that stuff. But the main reason, the main important thing about this is we can't depend on window. If you guys are familiar with front-end, a window is basically represents the environment that the JavaScript package is running in. And if PubNub is moving in a direction where their front-end package and their back-end package both don't depend on window, I'm not going to make a new library that is going to depend on window just because the company's not going in that direction and no one else is. So I thought it was interesting. You know, the first thing I wasn't going to do was start to make a front-end only package again. So I chose Node as a target environment, similar as I chose Slack as the target product. So the idea was, yes, this is going to be primarily used on front end, but everything should run in Node. So no window, no UI. We'll figure that all out later. But for the core package, everything is going to be in Node. That would let us run on React Native without any crazy stuff going on there, because I don't think they have window either. I think it's like a shim. It would run on Electron, but also on the back end. So if you wanted to have a persistent process running in the back end, you could run it. The back end of the front end of the Electron app. And then most importantly, bots, right? Bots need to operate as a persistent process. It's not going to be a window open on someone's computer. Yeah, bots. So really, if you strip out the UI and we target Node, we're not doing any Windows stuff, any cross-compatibility stuff yet. We're talking about a framework that is just chats and users and messages and all those abstract concepts, basically, kind of where I started from. So all that fancy UI stuff will just hook into that. And that's where we start building ChatEngine. So if you look at this chart here, PubNub is that infrastructure I talked about. So that's the real-time, the internet part, the whole notifications, all the hard stuff, in my opinion. Then we have the SDK. That'll give you a bunch of abilities to work with users and chats. We can extend those with plugins. So if you think about those requirements that I had, maybe I can go back and find them. There we go. So if you make a library, if you guys have ever made a library or a package, and can you imagine what it'd be like to put all these features in as flags or module? I mean, it'd be crazy, right? You kind of want to design it to be modular because there's just too much stuff going on here. The pattern, if you just tried to make this a big singleton app, it would just be crazy, right? So what I did is I made a plugin structure. So the idea was, let's work with those abstract concepts, and then the plugins will hook in from the side somehow, and I'll figure that out later. Then what we can do is make skeleton UI components. So we have that core framework. Everyone's going to choose their own UI stuff because they just do, and people have different requirements. They might not need a UI. And we can provide you some stuff. So if you're using React, we'll make you some React stuff. If you're going to use just JavaScript, you can go ahead and go forward. If you're going to use whatever, but we're not going to marry you to any UI. This is a marketing slide. This is a sort of marketing positioning slide for the product. So this goes from low level to like full-blown solution all the way over here. I'll just call out a few because I see it's kind of distorted here. But on the protocol side, you have WebSockets and streaming. Then you have open source frameworks that build on top of that, like Socket.io, which is really just on top of sockets and streaming, sockets and polling. Then comes infrastructure as a service. So that's Amazon sits on top of that. Platform as a service, which is where PubNub is. Other things like Firebase, and there's Meteor and stuff like that. So, and on top of PubNub would be ChatEngine. A competitor to ChatEngine would be like Layer or Sendbird. So it's not intercom, right? Like intercom, you guys are probably familiar with. You drop in a tag of JavaScript and it pops up. That's more like what I built it originally, the chat in one line. But it's not PubNub. It's somewhere in, it's a little bit closer to the user, but they still can decide what it looks like and how it works. If you can't read these things, but what they say is, it says, the one for ChatEngine says servers, networking, messaging, features, and UI. And then the last one says the same thing, but it says minor customization. And then the one before it says no UI. So it's kind of like this weird partial UI. All right, so now we're going to get nerdy. What do you guys think is a good pattern for extendability? Anyone? No? Come on. Objects, right? Object-oriented pattern is great for extendability. You know, you have an instrument and a piano or a guitar, both instruments, but you can have different types of guitars. And this will be important for the plugin system later. But since we're dealing with these abstract concepts of users and rooms and chats, you know, you have a user, but then you have the user that is you. So that can extend from the senior level user. I'll go deeper and deeper into this as the talk goes on. And then what's a good pattern for event-based communication? Event emitters, right? So if you put those together, well, I'll save that for later, but this is an event emitter. You have one object emit an event and another object handle it. Normally this is done locally. So you'll do this like on your computer within, you know, maybe between, for example, if you're making an Electron app, you might do it between the front end and back end. If you're doing something that's, maybe if you've used Redis before, when you process a job, it sort of acts like an event emitter and receiver. But we're gonna do it over the network. So you will emit an event, like a message or like someone sending a GIF or something, and then on the client they'll receive it. And this is very similar to that fan out pattern that I showed in the beginning. So if you put them all together, you get this object-oriented event emitter framework, which is not really a common pattern, but the idea is that you have a chat and the chat has events, but you can have multiple different chats, and chats can have different mix-ins depending on which one. So you might, for example, in Slack, you might have that Trello bot in one chat but not another. You might have something that expands URLs in one chat but not another, and that happens through, it's got to happen through some kind of configuration, and object-oriented is a great way to do that, but then you still need events. So it gives you this class, a classful event emitter. And so I've got some explanation here what that means. So this is our actual documentation for the chat class in ChatEngine. And you can see there's a chat, and it can be asleep, it can have users, you can connect, emit, handshake, invite, it can have search, all this stuff. Those are the regular properties of the chat class, but then it also has events. So there's the connected event, there's error events, and there's message events. Now the fun part is when you add a plugin, you're actually extending the chat class through object orientation, and you're basically, it's like a mixin, but the mixin has its own events. So you get to add typing indicator start typing onto the chat class. So when someone starts typing, you say chat dot typing indicator start typing, and that emits a typing indicator start typing event. The events are namespaced, so if you see the $ and the dots and stuff, so they don't collide with other plugins. All right, so the actual code. Again, it's basically just chats and users. And this is what our project structure looks like in the framework. So there's chat, event, me, search, session, and user. Then there's emitter and root emitter, and everything inherits from emitter. So everything is an event emitter in ChatEngine. And so for example, chat is an emitter. For example, user is an emitter, but then me extends user, which extends emitter. So everything is an emitter. Me is just a special kind of user. This is what ChatEngine looks like in about 20 lines. If you were to make a really simple demo, you subscribe to like a ready event. So when ChatEngine is ready, you get the me user, then you can make a new chat, and you do that through the new keyword in JavaScript, which is obviously the object-oriented way. New ChatEngine chat, then my chat on connected, you can send a message. So my chat emit message. And then you can subscribe to messages, my chat on message, right? So when you say my chat emit message, that fires a PubNub publish that goes over the network to someone else, and anyone who's listening for that event called message will get it. We'll get that message. So back to this example of what is chat. If you ran that code and added a UI, it would look like this. Similar for users or chat events about users. So for online and offline, if a user comes online, you can do my chat.online and you get that user object. Same thing for offline. And if you were to render it, it would look like that. As people go on or offline, you could see it. And it goes on from there. So these are a list of concepts that I wrote documentation about. You have, again, that me that I keep coming back to, users, chats, events, payloads, and namespaces, all this stuff about how to structure this really complex kind of chat application. So now we get to plugins, like I mentioned earlier. This is an example plugin that lets you upload images. So we include a third-party library called UploadCare. It's a whole service about uploading images and all that. And we bind it into ChatEngine and give it its own event. So that way, all that happens is when you click upload, everything's taken care of for you, and then that image or whatever the result of that upload is gets posted into the chat as an event. And anyone who's listening to it can subscribe to that. But that event doesn't go to every chat. It only goes to the one that you specified, right? By channel name or by in memory or whatever. So in practice, let's see, they didn't actually, it started at the wrong point. There we go. So you click an image, it uploads. And it's posted into a chat. If you had two windows, they would both see that. Then that's an example of a mixin for the class. So the class gets a new method called upload, and then the event is emitted. But there's also this other idea where what if you want to render Markdown? That's not really extending a class, right? That's sort of happens in the event loop, right? It's going to happen in an event. So what we do is we actually have sort of a middleware where when the event is received from the network, it gets processed through the plugins and then comes out to the front end. So for Markdown, for example, you just do ChatEngine plugin, Markdown, and then when Markdown is emitted, it just comes out the other end. And I'll show you more, again, as we get deeper of how that actually works. Here we go. So if you're familiar with a waterfall pattern, that's what I'm talking about with middleware. So the event is received by the client by ChatEngine. ChatEngine receives the event, then it is processed through a plugin queue, which is built when you attach the plugins. And at the end of that queue, it's emitted to your front end, your framework, or whatever you built on top of ChatEngine. A fun thing about this that's not demonstrated is that if anything goes wrong in any of these, it usually skips to a error pattern. So if something goes horribly wrong in task 3, it doesn't complete, and then you get an error instead of the event. This is the Markdown plugin actually working. All right, that's and using this system of class extension or mix-ins and this middleware pattern, we were able to make a bunch of plugins. This one is a muting plugin. Like I said, this one would actually kill that message from emitting and turn it into something else. So Jar Jar Binks keeps talking and he gets to mute him. This is an online user search demonstration. So what happens is we take the property chat.users, which includes a list of the online users, and then we just provide a mix-in that looks in memory to see if the properties of a user match what you're inputting. This is a unread notification plugin. So there's an indicator up here about the number of unread messages. What happens here is when the plugin adds a state property into the chat class, which is just a counter of the number of unread messages. Every time the page is not visible and the chat engine receives the chat receives a message, it increments the plugin, and that's it. Sorry, it increments the counter, and then you can call a message to empty the counter. Call a function to empty the counter. Okay, so now we're almost at Slack, right? We have multiple chats, there's plugins, there's users, there's Markdown, there's all that stuff. We're able to really start building the features out on top. And I tried to clone it, really, and just to see how far we could get. The ultimate goal was to switch our company off of Slack into our homemade one, but we never got that far. And that really leaves out the robots, though. So how do we do robots? How do we do chatbots? Since everything runs in Node, we can actually make artificial users. When you run the Node script, since the client initiates, it actually comes online, and we can make it look like it's typing. So I say hello, but then the chatbot sends a start typing event. That renders on the UI, and it looks like the chatbot's actually thinking. It's done in the same exact interface as the client-side code, because it's all the same framework anyway. Later on, I can run the demo and show the actual code. So this is the code, and I can walk through it. Basically, it just says when I'm invited to a chat, say, hey, how can I help you? When I receive a message, make it look like I'm typing, wait a second, and then send a message, and then make it look like I'm not typing anymore. So this runs in Node, but it could run on a client or whatever, it doesn't matter. Okay, demos. So I will put this in here. Test. Okay. Hello. So this is a examples repo where I did a lot of the initial experimentation to see if we could just get things to run. And it's become pretty complex. over time. I can get the Angular one to run. So this is the Slack clone I was working on. And it integrates with Auth0. So I can log in with Google, and I can use my PubNub account. And then I come back to the Slack page, and I'm here. And I can start typing. And as I mentioned, there's different chats, so I can move around into different ones. If I attach a message, if I attach a image, let's see. I don't know what images I have here, so let's be safe and choose one of me. Okay. So that uploads. And if I were to open this again in another window, I just got to prove that it works, right? So we have a multi-client chat application. This is the online user search. It doesn't do much with only one user, but you can see that if it matches Ian, I'm still there. And there's a bunch of other stuff too. There's like emoji, so I can do pizza. I don't believe this works at the moment. I think it's going to render, it's going to render actual HTML instead. And if you could hear it, it actually plays a notification when you get a message. This also renders in, it works in Electron as well. Okay, so now I'm gonna run the chatbot demo. So this is a really, really big jQuery application, which I just used to prototype because it didn't have any sort of BS from any of the modern JavaScript frameworks. And I'm here in another folder, and I have the bot right there. And you can notice that I am a user called a red whale. If I call node.js, then I get an error. Hold on. If I call node.js, then we should see the bot come online. So the bot comes online, and I can click on the bot and start a conversation, and that code executes. So the bot, these are all the events that the bot is subscribed to. So it gets that someone came online, that chat engine's ready, the network is connected. It gets who's in that new chat. It sees it gets invited, and then it sees a stop typing event. Now I can start typing and see that the start typing event is sent to the bot, but it's not going to do anything yet. When I click send, the bot makes it look like it's typing and sends a message back. So yeah, that is powered by that code I showed you earlier, and I think I have it. Oh, I don't actually have it up right here. Let's see. So yeah, here's that code again. When the chat gets a message, make it look like I'm typing, send a message back, and then stop typing. All right. I have some other really simple demos that just explain the basic examples and things. Let me see. So this is just a simple online list, which gives everyone, every time you refresh the page, you get a new username. This is powered by PubNub Presence, which keeps track of those users for you. So a lot of this was pretty easy for me to build because PubNub offers a lot of the core hard parts about finding out who's in a session, and sending the messages and making sure they're received and things. And I was just able to build these plugins and framework on top. So this is the README. There's way more stuff here if you're interested. Oh, there's all the concepts articles I wrote. There's videos. There's articles on how to make it run in every front end. So React, JavaScript, Vue, Angular, jQuery, how to make it work with Facebook, how to do that chatbot I mentioned. And then we have a few other third-party integrations, a list of all the plugins. And yeah, I wrote all this, and I suggest you check out the README or the official docs. But let's now that I've covered that, let's continue the story a little bit. So we got the hold on, I gotta present now. Okay. So I made ChatEngine. We did the plugins. We made all these examples. We made sure it works. We got Slack basically done and all this stuff. And we're getting ready to launch it now. We're just thinking about like, how do we get this out? We wrote some tests. So there were 12 at this time, but now there's like 50. Something really interesting about testing is trying to test two clients talking to each other within the same node process is really difficult, especially since PubNub at the time treated connections as a singleton. So for a long time, we were just talking to ourselves, thinking it was working, until I had to actually do a lot of like hard, I think it's called decache, D-E-C-A-C-H-E, to make sure that we weren't getting a singleton back. And then I documented the whole thing. So I chose JSDoc. Amazingly, JSDoc supported my crazy object-oriented event emitter. So that's how I was able to render those docs earlier, is that it actually has class inheritance, mixins, and events in classes. So I was just amazed because I tried some other frameworks for documentation, and nothing else supported this complex system. The front end team at PubNub took the JS doc and made it obviously a lot prettier with their branding, and they put it up online. We added 2 engineers into the team. So until now, it was just me. Everything you've seen, I was doing alone. And meeting with Steven once a week. It took me about probably a year to get there. And we added these 2 other engineers, and they spent maybe a couple months with me just editing stuff. There's not a lot of activity in these 2 commit graphs, because we actually started building something else, which is a backend. So you can imagine, okay, how do you do authentication with something that's only front end like this? Well, what we have at PubNub is a thing called PubNub functions. This is a microservice backend that intercepts messages before they reach their destination to make sure that someone's authenticated to send that message or to receive it. And it also allows people to log into the app to get permissions into channels and things like that. So this is a pretty nice image about how that works. You publish stuff over PubNub, it goes into the functions, which is this orb kind of thing, and the function processes the data before it goes to the other side. So the idea is, if you guys are familiar with the serverless sort of word floating around now, or microservices, that kind of stuff, this is a microservice architecture that prevents messages from reaching the destination if they're not logged in or if they're banned, things like that. I'll go more into the real use case of this later. But they spent a lot of time working in functions. This is a screenshot of ChatEngine functions. They spent a lot of time working in ChatEngine functions to make a server. You can see a function here called sign to request. So that uses like your secret key to authenticate the request and do secure things, because obviously you don't want to have like secure keys on the front end. This is an example of one of those requests. So this permits someone's auth key, like someone's auth credentials, to access the basic channels, basically the global channels, the things that everyone needs to access for ChatEngine. And then we launched it. So we launched the product. We had a great time. They got balloons that said ChatEngine. And we started getting customers. This is Rooster Teeth. They're local in Austin. They implemented ChatEngine for their live functionality. So they're starting to launch live streams, and they want to have chat. So the chat on the sidebar over here is all ChatEngine. And they did some cool stuff with functions. They used functions to ban users and mute them if they were banned. And they also created spam throttling. So if people post too much or they use dirty words, they intercept those messages. That's actually live too, if you want to check it out. And obviously, Rooster Teeth is just freaking awesome. The package started to gain popularity. So I think this is the most recent screen grab, but it's getting about like 1,300 to 1,500 installs per week. We added another 3 engineers and a project manager, and we started working on mobile. So it's all been Node.js, and we were able to get cross-platform from Node, Angular, and React Native, and all those kind of packagers, or sorry, I don't even know what you would call React Native. I guess just frameworks. We were able to get cross-platform, but when we released it to customers, they really wanted native support, so they started working on that. It's also fun because this guy is our project manager, and he made a commit, so he gets his own. You know, we get to include him on the on the GitHub. So we continued to do the docs and update the pages, and by now, just the whole dang company was involved. It's been about probably 2.5 years by now. And they put it on the solutions drop down. So they put ChatEngine up there. They have the Eon project I did earlier. And then they also have this use case, which they said is chat, right? And that basically shows you ChatEngine again. By now, like 45% of our customers are coming in and asking for chat. When I started the project, it was about 20%. This is the ChatEngine landing page. And the most recent hires are a product manager and a technical writer. And this is my contribution over time. So over the end here, I became a lot more of like a manager and facilitator between the groups, offering advice and doing just writing documents, basically a lot of documentation. I mean, it was incredible how much stuff I had missed that I had thought I had explained. So this whole process for me, coming from, like I explained in the beginning, just making small tools to onboarding every one of these members on how to do the framework, writing the documentation so everyone can learn, just following through this whole thing has just been incredible. It's really, yeah, it's just, I would really highly recommend sticking through a project if you get a chance like this. It was really difficult for me during the end to coordinate and onboard, I mean, everybody and sort of have the growing team around it. But I'm just so proud of it now. It's probably one of the best things I've done in my whole career. Yeah, there we go, the 1,500 NPM installs. But what I think is cool are these other numbers. So there's 7,000 PubNub accounts, PubNub keys. There's 60,000 people per day interact with this. I think a lot of that is due to Rooster Teeth and the demos that we have online, where you just sign up and you can just play with it. There's 70 million messages per month, which I don't even know where those are coming from. If there's, I think this is something like, I think it's like 10 messages per user or something. All right, code, yeah. So we can dive into that waterfall again. I can start showing you some of the more low-level stuff. If you guys are tired, we can just call it. Is there anything you guys want to see specifically? No? All right, I'll just go through it. So this is the plugin queue that I mentioned with that waterfall. And what happens is basically when you add a plugin, it gets attached into memory. And then as a message comes through, it's going to do that waterfall call on every single middleware the plugin has attached to. This is, I mean, I think, again, this is like 30 lines, but this took a long time to figure out, and it's the most powerful part of the whole thing. This is a user class. It's really simple, right? This is the whole thing. It's 150 lines. It basically just has a user. It has some properties. You can update its information, and that's about it. This is an example of private invites. And that's it, yeah. So that's me. You can add me on these social networks. If you guys have any questions or code, want to know about any code, I'm happy to dive into them. Yeah, sure. The question was, did I look at any existing implementations like Event Emitter 2 or anything like that? It's actually based on Event Emitter 2. Yeah, so I don't know if I show that. Yeah, let me show you that part. It's here, see? Yeah, so I think I used Event Emitter 2 because of namespacing that it has. Yeah, because so one of the things I showed you earlier was the fact that you needed to have, I don't know if I'll ever find this now. Blah, 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 blah. Let's see, there it is. Okay, so since we're doing plugins and there's already system plugins, we needed to namespace the events. So Event Emitter 2 allows you to have dots and stuff so that you can subscribe to like system dot star and get all the system events. So the question was, how do you handle inconsistencies between plugins? And the answer is that we didn't get that far yet. So definitely something, we sort of have been thinking about that. And one of the solutions is not actually into, so you asked specifically about the queue processing, which you would just have to be smart when you're implementing it. But one thing we did do, we found is that if you have a plugin that extends the class and you're writing to memory of the class, and say you call this.data or something, like that's gonna be so common that even our own 2 developers got in conflict. So Manuel, who was on that earlier, he wrote a really simple this.get and this set, which writes to a namespace memory store. But that's a good question about the queue. You really would just have to, yeah. I'd be curious how Slack does that too. Yeah. Any other questions? He said that Layer was a competing product. How did I think about differentiating myself from Layer? So I actually did not do a ton of research into what other people were doing. That had pretty interesting results. If I were to do it again, I would definitely do a lot more research into the competition. But in some ways, I actually made decisions that completely differentiated our product unintentionally. For example, there's another product, there's a competing product that when you sign up, you have to upload your users on a backend. So you have to migrate your users and authentication into their system. And I designed the system so that you would basically pull that information as you needed it. They required that you pushed it all immediately, and I made it a pull system. Their onboarding experience is way slower because now when you want to get started with this thing, you have to first, number one, implement something on your back end that pushes all the users over. So it's kind of funny because I didn't really, also these things weren't out yet. We actually, our competition mostly released all at the same time. There were things like Olark and there were things like Sendbird that kind of, they had a really UI heavy and stuff, but we just weren't going to do that. So it was really interesting to see. I mean, I don't have a graph of like all the competition coming out at once and just seeing the comparing the like implementation styles and seeing who's paying for ads, to get signups and how that's going. Like the cool thing about NPM is all that, that little graph that I showed that's all public. So you can see what your competition, how it's going, and you can read their docs and just see how your design decisions and branding are working into the decisions you made. So yeah, it was really, you know, one of our competitors released a product like 2 weeks before we did, and it was like a real bummer for us. But I looked at it and I said, holy crap, like not only is our company investing in the stuff that I'm doing, but like other companies are looking at what I'm doing too. So that was really, the whole thing has just been really crazy. Yeah. Um, yeah, you would have to make a PubNub account to use the service. The question was, if I npm install ChatEngine, do I need a PubNub account? The answer is yes. But I also will take that opportunity to talk about this other thing I made, which was pretty impactful to the company as well. Let's see. So again, the question was, do I have to make a PubNub account if I npm install ChatEngine? And the answer is yes. And not only do you have to make a PubNub account, you have to enable like a bunch of features and deploy that microservice to the cloud. Sorry, to PubNub functions. And that's like really crazy. No one's ever going to do that, right? So what I did is I made a little script that sets that all up for you. I hacked the PubNub portal. I didn't talk to the teams or anything. I'm like, I just need this for myself right now. So I sent them the same API requests that get sent from the browser to make the account the way it needs to be made. And that actually was really great. And what happened was it allowed us to make accounts really easily. And eventually another team picked that up and made it into this little product here, which they call ChatEngine in a box. So what I do is I just click deploy ChatEngine, and it sends those requests to make the account, and it also sets up a PubNub function that's going to run. And then it gives you the keys at the end of it. Then you can just put those into your startup script. This was so impactful now that they have started to do this for the PubNub itself, basically, and the other SDKs. So it's, you know, something that, again, that's been so amazing about this is I made this script for myself, and then that evolved, then a team picked it up, and then that happened, and then now it's a company strategy, you know, just from these little hacks you do to make something easier for yourself. So yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about that. So the question was, how do we persist the data? Do we keep it in a database, or is there a cache? Data persistence has been a challenge. PubNub offers a history API that allows you to scroll back and see the other messages. So the persistence of the messages in the chat was not a problem for us. And then since we have that event queue that can render, you know, do that rendering on the client side, we don't have to like do any kind of maintenance on that because whatever's published gets processed. The challenge was, how do we add like chat metadata? How do we add user metadata to the system? So luckily, PubNub Functions has a key value store, and we just make requests against the key value store on the function side. It's another interesting thing is that Functions was a product that had users at launch, but we are now the #1 user of Functions. So the two teams have become interacting and really heavily, and a lot of the requirements that we have are now getting pushed into that product because we're just a user, you know. So the KV store is something that we originally, I think the KV store had a cache of like 30 days or something, and we were pushing to get that longer. So that would I what that? Yeah, so the question was, would you use your own database alongside ChatEngine? And I would say absolutely. It would not be a full solution for example, authentication and user state and all the other fun stuff you'd want to do, especially if you're going to differentiate your product. I think ideally that you would not need to. You actually don't need to if you don't care about security. You don't need any of that, and if you want to just have a generic chat app. But yeah, one of the main things that Rooster Teeth does within that function, within that microservice, is just calls another service that's on their server. So a request is made to the microservice, and the microservice makes a request to their server to see if that user is like an admin. And as I mentioned earlier about the way that push versus pull of user information, that was a design decision that I made because if I were making this, I would just want to get started and then worry about that push and pull stuff. So yeah, if you're going to implement this beyond a demo or beyond an MVP, you would want to use your own database. So the question is, can you send an image over PubNub? PubNub is a streaming network that operates in 32 kilobyte packets. So if you could base 64 the image into 32 kilobytes, then you could send that image over. You can also piece it together if you wanted to, but it's not in a real-time streaming infrastructure like a video streaming infrastructure would be, or like audio streaming. It's not like that. They're chopped up packets. It's not optimized for that sort of peer-to-peer stream. Exactly, yeah. I feel like I had something else to say about that. Whatever. Yeah, that's exactly right. And in the modern case now, we use WebRTC, which you basically establish that there are peers online, and you use WebRTC to connect the peers. And then WebRTC establishes the peer-to-peer connection, basically allowing you to stream one to another. Yeah, one of the really popular hackathon hacks is for people to do images over PubNub or try to get video running at whatever frames per second that you can that you can try to get. Any other questions? No? Cool. Thank you.